Something unexpected happened to Dwight Yoakam recently, and it wasn't the kind of story that gets buried in the entertainment section or dismissed as a minor inconvenience. This was the kind of moment that made people stop scrolling, stop talking, and start paying attention. For an artist who has spent nearly 4 decades building a reputation on discipline, consistency, and almost mythological level of endurance on stage, what unfolded at a major music festival felt jarring in a way that was hard to shake. And the more you understand about what actually happened and about the man behind performance, the more that moment starts to reveal something far deeper than a single bad night under the summer sun. It started like any other stop on a busy tour. Dwight Yoakam had already completed performances in Washington, D.C. and at a festival in Bristol before arriving at the Railbird Music Festival in Lexington, Kentucky. For most artists, that kind of back-to-back scheduling would already be a test of physical limits. For Yoakam, it was simply Tuesday. He stepped onto that stage the way he always has, with control, presence, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from doing something at the highest level for longer than most careers even last. The crowd was ready. The set began without a hint of trouble, and then, without warning, everything shifted. Early into the performance, Yoakam stepped away from the stage. There was no announcement, no prepared explanation, just a sudden absence where there had been momentum. The crowd felt it immediately. That particular silence that settles over an audience when something is clearly wrong, when the script has gone off course in a way nobody planned for. It was later clarified that he had begun experiencing overheating and dehydration, conditions that can spiral quickly when the heat is intense, the humidity is suffocating, and the body has already been pushed through multiple high-energy performances in a short window of time. The outdoor festival environment had become a factor that no amount of experience could simply override. After roughly 10 minutes, he returned. That return brought a wave of relief through the crowd. He picked the set back up with the same professionalism that has defined him across 4 decades of live performance. And for a brief stretch, it appeared that the moment had passed. 2 more songs played out. The atmosphere began to stabilize, but the stability didn't hold. For the second time that night, Yoakam was forced to stop, and this time, the decision was final. The second exit carried a completely different weight than the first. This wasn't a cautious pause or a strategic reset. This was the body drawing a line that could not be crossed, regardless of how much a performer on stage might have wanted to push through it. Before leaving, he addressed the audience directly. He told them that in nearly 4 decades of performing, this was only the second time he had ever been forced to walk off stage mid-show. And then he said something that very few performers would have the honesty to say out loud in that moment. He told the crowd that he felt like he might pass out. That admission, delivered without drama or deflection, said more about the severity of the situation than any official statement could have. For someone whose entire public identity is built on composure and endurance, saying those words in front of a live audience took a kind of honesty that most people in his position would have avoided. The show ended there. Not because of a technical failure, not because of scheduling conflict, but because his body had simply reached its limit under conditions that left no room for negotiation. What followed in the hours after was handled with the kind of speed and clarity that the situation demanded. A statement was released confirming that the incident had been caused by heat exhaustion, brought on by the combination of extreme outdoor temperatures, heavy humidity, and the physical strain of consecutive performances. Festival staff and emergency medical personnel responded immediately, and Yoakam received attention without delay. The statement emphasized that he was absolutely fine, and that phrase was repeated in a way that made clear how important it was for fans to hear it. But even with that reassurance, the details surrounding the incident made it impossible to dismiss as a routine inconvenience. Heat exhaustion serious enough to stop a show twice in the same set, for an artist known for never stopping, signals a level of physical stress that demands to be taken seriously. The fan response that followed was striking in its own way. There was no backlash, no frustration over a shortened set, no social media complaints about ticket value. Instead, what poured in was concern. Messages from people who had watched him perform for decades, many of them worried not about the show they missed, but about the man who left the stage. That response reflects something real about the relationship Yoakam has built with his audience over time. It wasn't just built on great records or polished performances. It was built on authenticity and trust. the kind that accumulates slowly over years and shows up most clearly in moments of vulnerability. To understand why this moment carries so much weight, you have to understand a career that led to it. Dwight Yoakam did not arrive at success through the traditional path. Nashville rejected him early on because his sound, rooted in honky-tonk and bluegrass tradition, didn't match the polished country pop direction the industry was chasing at the time. Rather than reshape himself to fit expectations, he moved to Los Angeles and built his audience the hard way, performing in clubs alongside cowpunk and alternative acts, creating a following from the ground up with no industry safety net beneath him. That decision meant that when success finally came, it came on his terms, but also meant that maintaining it would require relentless effort rather than institutional support. His breakthrough album delivered in a way that silenced the doubters. It reached #1 on the country albums chart, produced hits that climbed into the top 5, and made history as the first country music video to air on MTV. That momentum carried forward through the late 80s and into the 90s, with albums that produced multiple top 10 hits while never abandoning the traditional sound he had been told the public wouldn't accept. And through all of it, he kept moving. He expanded into acting, earning recognition for his work in films like Sling Blade and later appearing in projects like Panic Room and the television series Goliath. Each new venture added to his workload rather than replacing what came before. The career never slowed down because slowing down was never part of the design. That history matters because it reframes what happened at Railbird. This isn't a story about an aging performer struggling to keep up. It's a story about someone who built a career on the principle of never stopping, and what it looks like when the body eventually weighs in on that decision. The physical demands of decades of touring, without the kind of significant breaks that many artists build into their schedules, accumulate in ways that aren't always visible until a moment like this one makes them impossible to ignore. There were other pressures along the way that added to the weight he carried. An ambitious film project he wrote, directed, and starred and failed to connect the way he had hoped, leading to financial strain that created ripples throughout his career. Among the consequences was the end of his long creative partnership with guitarist and producer Pete Anderson, a collaboration that had shaped his signature sound from the very beginning. Rebuilding parts of his creative process while maintaining audience expectations is not a small thing, and the willingness to push through that kind of disruption without retreating says a great deal about the person doing it. He continued to take artistic risks that prioritized personal vision over commercial calculation. Albums that blended rhythm and blues, Tejano influences, and experimental elements received critical recognition but limited radio support. He pursued legal disputes over his catalog and streaming rights rather than accept terms that didn't align with a sense of ownership and control. At every turn, the choices he made were the harder ones, the ones with more personal cost and less guaranteed return. That pattern didn't stop when the stakes got higher. It became more pronounced. Where he stands now adds yet another layer to this picture. Unlike the earlier stages of his career, Yoakam's current life includes responsibilities that simply didn't exist before. He became a husband and a father later than most artists in his generation, welcoming a child in his 60s, a change that reshapes priorities in ways that aren't always visible from the outside, but are deeply felt from within. The tension between a performance schedule built for someone without those anchors and a personal life that now includes him is real, even if it rarely surfaces publicly. Moments like the one in Lexington are when that tension briefly becomes visible to everyone watching. His creative instincts remain as sharp and personal as they have ever been. His decision to record a bluegrass interpretation of Purple Rain was not a commercial calculation. It was a direct response to the death of Prince, something he described as genuinely affecting, not just as a loss in the industry, but as something that moved him personally. That kind of connection between lived experience and creative output has always been at the core of what makes his music feel honest. It hasn't changed, and that refusal to let the creative process become mechanical, even after all this time, is both what makes his work meaningful and what keeps the demands on him so high. When you hold all of this together at once, the decades of relentless touring, the creative risks, the personal losses, the financial pressures, the family life built later than expected, and the physical limits that made themselves known on a stage in Kentucky, what you get is not a story of decline. What you get is a portrait of someone who has carried an enormous amount for an enormous amount of time, and who, on one particularly difficult summer evening, hit a wall that nobody could talk him through or perform his way past. He recovered. He thanked his fans and the medical team and the festival staff. He moved forward the way he always has. But the question that lingers after all of it, the one that doesn't get answered in a press statement or a social media post, is the same one his fans are quietly asking themselves. How long can someone sustain this level of intensity before the balance has to shift? For Dwight Yoakam, that answer has never come in the form of a public announcement. It has always shown up in the work, in the choices, and in the quiet decisions made between shows. What happens next may not look like a dramatic change, but after everything that unfolded at that festival, it's clear that something has to give, and the only real question is what and when